The stories in your book, they're unbelievable.
You spend your days picking up the remains of the dead by the road. Is it really that unbelievable?
We are talking about ESCHATRILOGY, also known as simply Book of the Dead. Now this one is directed by Davian Mortar and is a low-budget British zombie anthology film that kind of has 3 stories and a kind of small wraparound story that takes place in various times through the kind of the zombie apocalypse. So we essentially have this wraparound story of this kind of guy who is sort of holed up, obviously later on in the zombie apocalypse, and he kind of finds a kind of a stranger and ultimately reads his book where he sees these 3 stories. Now the kind of the thread with this one is that the devil has risen and has decided to teach mankind a lesson because they're too kind of not fearing him anymore or something, and so raises the dead and thus causing the zombie apocalypse. So there's one little angle which is a little bit different here. We also have a zombie which is in all 3 of the little shorts here. So there's only 3 movies, 3 short films, so they're a little bit more length to some kind of other anthology films. The first one it's kind of a Frankenstein movie. It takes place at the kind of the beginning of the apocalypse, when people are first starting to turn, and ultimately we just see various kind of people, including this kind of family and members of a kind of a police station, all turn. The crux of this one is the kind of father of this family ends up sort of turning into a zombie and kind of still maintains some humanity, however, as he recognises his young daughter and kind of doesn't want to attack her and even protects her. And that's kind of what I mean by like a Frankenstein thing. He kind of has some elements of humanity and kind of carries her off. I mean, there's not a lot to the story, but it was kind of quite a good idea in a lot of ways. The acting is quite poor, to be honest. Among all 3 stories, if I'm honest with you, the acting, a lot of people's, there's different levels of kind of talent in regards to acting, but generally speaking, the acting is a little weak in this whole thing, particularly in this first movie, I have to say. The second film is possibly the most generic. It's just a guy running away from zombies, and he's somewhat apathetic towards other survivors that he kind of sees that he could help but chooses not to. Nothing really other than that, to be honest with you, with that film. The third film is about a guy and his young boy who has been bitten and is ultimately going to turn, and he drives out in the country and finds a kind of small community of like 3 people, but they seem to be a little bit nutty, shall we say, and doesn't see it quite eye to them. So there's nothing to write home about story-wise. I did like some of the elements here. Like I said, the first one had a kind of a Frankenstein vibe with this kind of, I mean, we've seen kind of zombies somewhat maintain humanity before. Obviously, I guess Bub in kind of Day of the Dead, for example. But I quite liked it. It was quite sweet. But like I said, the acting was not good in the whole movie, really. The second one is more or less kind of nothing to write home about, because the story is just a guy runs away from some zombies and encounters a muscly one. And then the third story probably had the most amount of plot. But again, it reminded me a little bit of The End of the Mist, to be honest with you. The tragedy with this kind of like this young kid, obviously only living on borrowed time, kind of I got vibes at the end of the Mist. What can I say that works? I think there is some ideas here that are a little fresh. Obviously, the reason why the zombies come back to life is a little different. We have this kind of like crusty cowboy guy that comes out the earth, and he's ultimately the devil. He kind of looks like the guy who you'd see in a kind of rock bar, sitting at the bar, smelling of just like days old clothes that haven't been washed. I think they could have done a better job with the kind of the devil, to be honest. So the makeup, this is a relatively low budget movie. The makeup is a kind of a mixed bag. There are some actually quite impressive makeup and kind of practical effects in regards to some of the kind of the gore kills here, but the actual makeup and the zombies generally is a little weak. It's kind of just white face paint. You'll see the kind of like the the lines of the makeup finishes, and I always wonder why, for example, some zombies are made up to have their hairs all sprayed up, like women have all this their hair all sprayed up and stuff. It's like, it doesn't make sense. The zombies wouldn't, why have they got all their hair sprayed up, and why is there like cuts on their clothes and things like this? It's just kind of like typical without really thinking about why people have died. It's just like, let's just kind of like make them look messy and stick a bit of blood on them. One of the things I would say that I kind of did like about this movie is, considering it's such a low budget film, there's a hell of a lot of extras. I mean, I would assume this is probably some local thing where the neighbourhoods all kind of got involved. And, hey, do you want to be a zombie in my film? And they've got the whole kind of like neighbourhood out being zombies and stuff like that. So there is quite a lot of, we see quite a lot of people all kind of dressed up in zombies to give it a sense of scale, which I thought was quite good. And then obviously it all takes place within the kind of the same universe, that's around the same area, just in different time frames, rather than three completely kind of separate stories. And as I say, there is one zombie that kind of, not that he has a major part in two of the stories at least, but at least he's, there's a little bit of a consistent there. Overall, it's pretty forgettable, to be honest with you. The problem is with the zombie genre, there's just so many. There's just so many films, and although I didn't think this one was necessarily bad, it just falls by the wayside because there's just so many of them there. I didn't think the stories were particularly compelling. Because it's an anthology, you never really get a sense of characters. The acting was by far the biggest detriment to this movie. I'm assuming this is just lots of not professional actors, because the acting is pretty diabolical, to be honest. But there were some kind of reasonable effects, a couple of story elements that I thought were interesting, could have had a bit more done to them. So overall, not the worst zombie film I've ever seen, but certainly nothing interesting. It doesn't do anything new to the genre. It's not that I would choose to watch again. And the cheapness is just kind of like, unfortunately, just shines through on this one. Despite I think them doing them best to probably overcome some of these obstacles, but ultimately it is what it is. It's a cheap-looking zombie film. I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.